The archaeologists didn't expect to find anything unusual. Just another sealed mound on the Siberian steppe, frozen, silent, forgotten. Then the dirt moved, and underneath it, gold, more gold than any of them had seen in a single excavation. But the gold wasn't the most disturbing thing they found. Beneath the treasure, there were bones, a woman's bones, and above them, a message. This is not a story about a curse. It's not a ghost story. What happened inside that tomb 2,600 years ago is far more interesting and far more human than either of those things. It's a story about a woman who understood power better than almost anyone alive in her time, and she used the one tool she had left to make sure you'd know it. To understand what she did, you first have to understand who the Scythians were, because almost everything you think you know about this civilization is wrong. The Scythians were nomadic horse warriors who dominated the Eurasian steppe for nearly 1,000 years, from roughly 900 BCE to 200 BCE. They left no written language of their own. Everything we know about them, every story, every detail comes from what other people wrote about them and from what's buried in the ground. And what's buried in the ground keeps rewriting everything we thought we understood about them, especially about their women. In 2019, researchers at Stanford University published a finding that rattled the academic world. About 1/3 of all Scythian women found in burial mounds had been interred with weapons. Not decorative weapons, not symbolic ones. Real weapons with real wear marks. Some of those women had bone damage consistent with combat. They had fought, they had survived fights, and then they had died. This is where the legend of the Amazons comes from. The ancient Greeks didn't invent those warrior women. They met them, and apparently they were terrifying enough to write home about. But not every Scythian woman buried with treasure was a warrior. Some were something else entirely, something that in certain ways was even more powerful. In 2022, archaeologists from the University of Warsaw were excavating a site in Siberia, a place locals call the Valley of the Kings. They opened a kurgan, a burial mound, standard procedure. The kurgan was sealed. That alone was remarkable. Most had been looted centuries ago. This one hadn't been touched. What was inside had been waiting exactly as it was left. Inside, they found gold, a bronze mirror, a crescent-shaped pectoral ornament, the kind only worn by women of the highest status, and then 200 meters away, they found the tomb of a Scythian prince. 200 meters. That's roughly 2 city blocks. A woman of tremendous status, buried within walking distance of a prince, with her own treasure, her own chamber, her own identity. Now here's where the story gets complicated, and I want you to pay close attention, because this is the part that every other account of this discovery gets wrong. Most coverage of this site focused on the gold. Reporters wrote about the treasure. They named the prince. They described the artifacts. Almost no one asked the more important question: who was she? The crescent pectoral she wore was not decorative. In Scythian culture, the crescent moon was associated with priestesses, women who were believed to stand between the living world and the realm of the dead. She wasn't a wife. She wasn't a concubine buried to serve a dead prince. She was a spiritual intermediary, someone whose presence in that tomb was considered essential for the prince's journey into whatever came next. In other words, she was there because she was powerful enough to be needed. That changes everything about how we read this burial. But was it voluntary? That is the question that has never been satisfactorily answered, and it's the question that the warning she left is directly connected to. Before we get to the warning, and we will get there, I need to tell you about a discovery made in Germany, because it's the piece that finally makes the whole picture make sense. In January 2025, a study published in the journal Nature confirmed something extraordinary about an ancient Celtic burial site in southern Germany. The woman interred there, dating to 583 BCE, was buried with gold jewelry, amber, and bronze. And the DNA analysis confirmed something that rewrote the social structure of that entire community. It was matrilocal. The men moved to live with the women's families, not the other way around. Think about what that means for the treasure in her tomb. That gold wasn't inherited from a husband. It wasn't given to her as a gift from a man. It was hers, earned, accumulated, and declared, in death as in life. Now let's connect the dots. Because the Scythian and Celtic cultures, while distinct, shared something in the archaeological record that scholars have only recently started taking seriously. In both civilizations, women of high status were buried with the tools of their power, not the tools of their husband's power. The treasure in the tomb was a declaration of identity. And across multiple ancient cultures from Mesopotamia to Rome to Greece, there's another tradition that runs parallel to this one: the practice of leaving inscriptions in tombs, messages for whoever came next. According to the World History Encyclopedia, funerary inscriptions, sometimes called epitaph curses, were extremely common in the ancient world, but calling them curses is misleading. Most were legal warnings. They said things like, "Whoever disturbs these remains will face divine punishment. Whoever opens this chamber without right will answer before the gods." Not supernatural threats, legal frameworks, backed by the highest authority available, the divine. Now, what if the woman in that Siberian tomb did the same thing? What if the message she left wasn't a supernatural curse, but a very deliberate, very human legal and spiritual claim? A claim that said, "I am here by choice, or by right, or by power, and whoever you are standing here looking at my bones, you need to understand what this place actually is." Here's the twist, and I mean it. This is the part where the story flips completely. Are you ready? Because what I'm about to tell you changes who this story is actually about. The warning in ancient funerary inscriptions was never aimed at the dead. It wasn't written for the person in the tomb. It was written for the living, for whoever came next, for you. She knew someone would eventually break through that sealed stone door. She knew they would find the gold first. She knew they would look at her bones and ask who she was, and she had something to say about it. She had one chance to speak across time, one medium, one surface, and she used it not to curse you, but to tell you who she was. That is a level of strategic thinking that most people alive today never achieve. Let's take a breath here, because I think it's worth asking, honestly, what you would do in her position, not the dying part, the part that came before. If you knew, really knew, that everything you built, everything you protected, everything that defined you would one day be dug up by strangers who had no idea who you were, what would you leave them? Most of us live our whole lives without ever answering that question. We accumulate things, we build reputations, we post content, we send messages, and then we assume someone will understand. She didn't assume. She knew no one would understand automatically. So she did the most human thing imaginable. She inscribed her intention into stone. Permanent, specific, impossible to misread. Now let's come back to the specific archaeological evidence. Because the most powerful part of this story isn't the interpretation. It's what the physical evidence actually tells us about her final days. Her bones showed no trauma, no violence, no signs of the kind of injury you'd expect if someone had been forced into a sealed underground chamber against their will. The bronze mirror beside her was positioned deliberately. Mirrors in Scythian culture were not vanity objects. They were ritual instruments, used in ceremonies connecting the physical world to the spiritual one. She was positioned facing east. In nearly every steppe culture we've documented, facing east in death was a deliberate orientation, aligned with sunrise, with rebirth, with what comes after. Everything about her burial was arranged, intentional, the kind of care that suggests not a hasty sacrifice, but a ceremony, a preparation, a woman who knew exactly what was happening and participated in every detail. Which brings us to the most haunting possibility of all. What if she chose this? Not under coercion, not in resignation, but as the ultimate act of a woman who controlled everything she touched, including the terms of her own death. We will never know for certain. That ambiguity is real, and any honest account of this story has to sit with it. But here's what we do know. She wasn't forgotten. She made sure of it. 2,600 years after they sealed that stone door, a team of archaeologists from Warsaw broke it open, and the first thing they saw was her gold. The second thing, her bones, and the third thing, the inscription. And here's the thing about that inscription. The Scythians didn't have their own written language. So what she left, what was carved above her remains, wasn't text in the conventional sense. It was symbolic, ritual, a visual language that her community would have understood immediately, even if we are still working to decode it fully today. That's not a weakness in the story. That's actually the whole point. She didn't write for archaeologists from Warsaw. She didn't write for you and me sitting here 2.5 millennia later. She wrote for the people she knew, her community, her successors, her world. The fact that we can't fully read it is not a failure. It's a reminder that she was a complete person, with a complete language and a complete world that existed entirely outside of anything we built. And yet, she's here, in this story, in this moment. Something she did or something done in her name survived. That's not magic. That's architecture, the architecture of legacy. Legacy isn't about being famous. It's not about how many people know your name. It's about leaving something real enough that a stranger 2,000 years from now has to stop and reckon with you. She achieved that. A woman whose name we don't even know, from a civilization that left no written records of its own, forced the modern world to stop and ask, who was she? Why was she here? What did she mean? Those 3 questions are still open, officially. And that's what makes this story genuinely different from every other mysterious ancient burial you've ever seen on this platform. Most ancient mysteries are closed loops. Someone discovers something, scientists analyze it, a theory emerges, and the story gets filed away. This one isn't closed, it's actively being researched. New DNA analysis techniques are being applied to Scythian burial sites right now. The 2025 Nature study on Celtic matrilocal communities used the same genomic methods, and the findings are changing textbooks. What we're learning, slowly, carefully from the ground up, is that the ancient world was far more complicated than the version we inherited. Women held power in ways that were systematically written out of the record by later civilizations. The civilizations that came after the Scythians, the Greeks, the Romans, the early medieval kingdoms, told the story of the ancient world in their own image. They looked back at the steppes and they saw barbarians. What they actually saw, if we're being precise, was a civilization where women commanded armies, performed sacred rituals, owned wealth independently, and were buried with the full declaration of their status intact. That version of history got buried too, just not underground. It got buried in the narratives that followed, the ones that decided what stories were worth telling and which ones to leave out. And this is where the existential weight of this story really lands. Because we do this too. Right now, today, we decide which stories get told and which ones disappear. We're the archaeologists of our own moment. Every day you decide what you share and what you hide, what you build and what you let crumble, what you fight for and what you let someone else define. She didn't get to decide her fate, but she decided how she'd be remembered. Can you say the same? If someone opened your life the way those archaeologists opened that mound, if they sifted through everything you've built, everything you've left behind, what story would the evidence tell? Would it be the story you intended to tell, or the one that just happened because you never stopped to carve your inscription into the stone? Let's come back to her, because there's one more detail of this story I haven't told you yet, and it's the detail that has stayed with me since I first read the excavation report. The bronze mirror found beside her was positioned face up, reflecting outward. Not inward, not back at her own remains, but toward the entrance of the chamber, toward whoever would eventually walk in. In Scythian ritual practice, a mirror facing outward in a tomb was a specific symbolic act. It meant, I see you, whoever enters this space, I already knew you were coming, and I prepared for you. That mirror wasn't positioned by accident. Someone her, or someone following her instructions, placed it precisely to greet whoever broke through that sealed door. 2,600 years later, that someone was a team from Warsaw. And in that moment, scientifically, materially, physically, a woman who died around 600 BCE saw them coming. Her preparation met their presence across 2,500 years of silence. That's not a curse. That's not a ghost. That is the most elegant communication across time I have ever encountered in any historical record, and it was designed by a woman whose name no one thought to write down. There is something quietly devastating about that. The men around her had their names preserved in the records of neighboring civilizations, in the chronicles of the Greeks who feared them. She had the mirror. And yet, and this is the part that matters, the mirror outlasted the names. The gold outlasted the chronicles. The bones outlasted the written record. What she left was more durable than anything anyone wrote about her. That's the real warning. Not don't disturb my tomb. not divine punishment awaits. The warning is this: the things that last are not the things you're told to value, they're the things you choose to protect. She protected the mirror. She protected the gold. She protected the orientation of her own body and the symbolic grammar of her world. And 2.5 millennia later, we're still reading every single one of those choices. So what do you protect? Not in a grand philosophical sense, in the specific daily physical sense. What do you arrange? What do you orient? What message are you building into the structure of your actual life? Because the mirror she left wasn't just a ritual object. It was also, in the most literal sense, a way of saying, look at yourself, not at me, at yourself, standing here, asking these questions. That was always the point. I've told you the archaeological facts. I've walked you through the scholarship. I've given you the social context and the ritual language. But I want to be honest with you about one thing before we close. We don't know her name. We will probably never know her name. The Scythians had no written language, and no neighboring civilization thought to record it. That gap is permanent. And yet, the fact that we don't know her name doesn't diminish the power of what she left. If anything, it amplifies it, because what survived wasn't her identity in words, it was her identity in action. The choices she made, the objects she arranged, the symbolic language she inscribed above her own bones. Her action outlasted her name. And action, it turns out, is a more reliable medium than language. That's the framework that the 2025 Nature study gave us for the Celtic burial site. They didn't find a name for the woman in that tomb either, but her DNA told them she was the center of her community's social structure. The men in that community moved to be near her family. The wealth accumulated in her household. And when she died, the community buried its treasure with her, not as an offering to a dead man, but as a declaration about a living legacy. Legacy, that word keeps coming back, and I think it's worth sitting with it for one more moment before the end, because legacy is one of those words we use so often it loses its teeth. Let's give it back its teeth. A legacy is not what you leave when you're finished. A legacy is what you're building right now, whether you intend to or not. Every day is a layer of sediment. Every choice is an artifact. Every relationship is a kurgan. When archaeologists dig through your layers, and someone always does, metaphorically if not literally, what will the artifact records say about what you valued? What story will the sediment tell about the choices you made? She couldn't choose how she died. We don't know that she chose to be there at all, but she chose what you'd find. She chose the mirror's angle. She chose the crescent. She chose the inscription. She chose... In a world that gave her very little control over almost everything, she found the one thing no one could take from her: intention. And she turned it into something that lasted longer than empires. The treasure is in a museum now. The bones are documented. The mirror is in a climate-controlled case. The crescent ornament is cataloged under a reference number that will never carry her name. But the warning, the one she encoded into the position of a mirror, the angle of a crescent, the symbolic inscription above her bones, that one reached you right now, in this moment, exactly as she designed it to. She had one chance to speak across time. She used it. The only question left, and I mean this as something genuinely worth sitting with after this video ends, is whether you're using yours. This channel exists because history is not a collection of dates and names. It's a record of every time a human being made a choice under impossible circumstances, and what that choice left behind. If that's the kind of history that keeps you up at night, if you're the kind of person who wants to understand not just what happened, but what it means for how you live right now, then subscribe, because we're just getting started. Leave a comment below. Tell me, what would you leave behind? If you knew someone would find it in 2,000 years, what single object would you choose to place in the center of your legacy? I actually read every one. And if this story moves something in you, if that mirror aimed across 2,500 years landed where it was supposed to, give it a like. It's the modern version of placing a crescent on someone's chest, a small act that says, I see this. It mattered. Next time, we go somewhere even older. A discovery that was made in 2024 that turned an entire field of history upside down, and that nobody outside of academic circles is talking about yet. Same time, same place. Don't miss it.